My own children drugged me. They left me in this old farmhouse to die. I felt so betrayed. I had to get out before I froze to death. I pushed myself up from the dirty floor. My whole body hurt. The room was spinning from whatever they gave me. I was determined to reach the door. I remembered Mark's cold eyes when he held the needle. Sarah just stood by the car, not looking at me. They thought I was losing my mind, but my anger made me sharp. I crawled toward the light under the door. I heard a car engine outside. It was Mark's fancy car. He was back. My fingers found a loose floorboard. Under it, there was a rusty hunting knife. It felt familiar in my hand. The engine stopped. A car door slammed. Heavy footsteps came toward the house. I held the knife tight. It was my only chance. I felt scared, but ready. I hid behind a fallen bookshelf. The dust made me cough. Mark came in with Sarah. I heard them talking about splitting my money. Mark was on the phone, sure I was dead. His flashlight beam moved around the room. It stopped where I found the knife. He knelt down, his back to me. I held my breath. Sarah gasped. She saw a photo on the floor from my 70th birthday. Mark picked it up and put it in his pocket. Then he turned right toward my hiding spot. I pressed into the shadows. My fingers were numb from the cold. I felt desperate. If I failed, my children would get everything. Sarah was by the door, typing on her phone. She said the lawyer would release the money in the morning. Mark stepped closer. I could smell his cologne. My heart was pounding. Suddenly, part of the roof cracked and fell between us. Debris scattered everywhere. A metal box dropped near my feet. It was my lockbox with important papers. I thought it was safe in the bank. Mark looked shocked. He reached for it, but I grabbed it first. He stared at me and whispered, "You're supposed to be dead." Outside, sirens were getting louder. The sirens meant someone was coming. I didn't know if they were here to help or hurt me. I felt dizzy and weak. I had to keep this lockbox. Mark blocked the door, and Sarah moved toward the window. I tried to open the box, but it was locked. Sarah smiled cruelly and said the key was gone. That made me angry. Then my fingers found a hidden spot on the box. Inside was a thumb drive. Mark saw it and rushed at me. I shoved the drive into my pocket just as headlights shone through the window. A car stopped outside. A person stepped out. It wasn't the police. It was someone I never thought I'd see here. The man was Frank, my husband's old partner. I hadn't seen him in years. I felt confused. Why was he here now? I needed help, but I didn't trust him. Mark and Sarah looked panicked. Frank called my name and came inside. He held up an envelope, my new will that I mailed to him. He said when I disappeared, he knew something was wrong. Sarah tried to grab it, but he moved away. Frank told me we had to go. He said my children told the police I was a danger to myself. I felt a chill. They were lying about me. Frank reached out his hand, but I saw him look at the thumb drive in my pocket. His eyes had the same greed as my children's. Frank's greedy eyes locked on the thumb drive in my pocket. I clutched it tighter, my knuckles white. I had to get out of this house with the evidence. My body ached from the cold and the drugs, but fear kept me alert. Mark and Sarah were frozen, staring at Frank. Frank smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. He said he was here to help, but I remembered how he always wanted a cut of my husband's business. He stepped closer, his hand outstretched for the drive. I backed away, bumping into the wall. The floor creaked under my weight. Suddenly, a loud crash came from the kitchen, a window breaking. Everyone turned. A stray dog burst into the room, barking wildly. It was a distraction. In that moment, I saw Frank slip a small object from his coat, a syringe. He wasn't here to save me. He was here to finish what my children started. The dog lunged at Sarah, and she screamed. I ducked past Frank, heading for the broken window. But as I reached it, I saw headlights turning into the driveway. Another car was coming, and this one had official markings. The official car meant police, or worse. I had to hide the thumb drive before they found me. My heart raced. I slipped the drive into a crack in the windowsill, covering it with loose paint. Frank was already at the door, greeting the officers like an old friend. Two uniformed men entered, their faces stern. One asked if I was Eleanor, the missing woman. Mark jumped in, saying I was confused and dangerous. I felt a surge of anger. They were lying to cover their tracks. I had to prove my sanity and expose them. If they took me, I'd be locked away, and I couldn't let that happen. One officer shone a light on me, noting my disheveled state. Then, his radio crackled with a report of a missing persons case matching my description. But the name wasn't mine. It was an alias. Frank had provided false documents. The officer hesitated, looking at Frank. I realized Frank had set this up long before tonight. He wanted me declared incompetent so he could control the estate. As they moved to handcuff me, I spotted Sarah pocketing the syringe Frank dropped. She wasn't on his side after all. Sarah's secret move gave me a sliver of hope. I had to use this rift between them. The officers were distracted by Frank's smooth talk. I pretended to stumble, drawing attention to the lockbox I'd left near the bookshelf. One officer picked it up, asking what it was. Mark rushed to say it was junk, but I shouted that it held proof of my children's plot. Frank tried to intervene, but Sarah stepped forward. She said she'd testify against Mark if they spared her. The room erupted into arguing. I edged toward the window where I'd hidden the drive. My body trembled with exhaustion. Every step felt like a mile. Then, the lockbox sprang open. The officer had forced it. Inside wasn't just papers. There was a dated recording device. Frank paled, recognizing it. He lunged for it, but the officer held him back. The recording started playing. My voice, clear and lucid, discussing the will with my lawyer months ago. It proved I wasn't incompetent. But as relief washed over me, one officer received a call. The voice on the speaker said the lawyer was dead. The recording was now the only copy. The lawyer's death changed everything. I had to protect that recording at all costs. The officers were now treating this as a crime scene. They separated us, Mark, Sarah, Frank, and me, into different corners. I was shivering, wrapped in a blanket one officer gave me. I had to get the thumb drive and recording to safety. Trusting someone was risky, but who could I trust? Sarah kept glancing at me, her eyes pleading. She mouthed, "I'm sorry," when no one was looking. Frank was being questioned, his story unraveling. He claimed he was trying to protect me, but the officers found the syringe in his coat. Then, suddenly, the stray dog from earlier returned, dragging a small bag in its teeth. It dropped it at my feet. Inside was a phone, my old burner phone I thought I'd lost. It still had charge. I quickly powered it on, seeing missed calls from my real lawyer's number. But as I scrolled, a text came through. "They know about the backup. Run!" The sender was unknown. One officer noticed the phone and reached for it. I pulled away, but he grabbed my arm. His grip was firm, and his badge looked off. Too new, too shiny. He wasn't a real cop. The imposter officer's grip tightened on my arm. I had to break free before he took the phone. My mind raced. Who sent that text? The real officers were distracted by Frank's confessions spilling out. Mark was yelling about his inheritance. I twisted my wrist, dropping the phone. It skidded under a table. The imposter cursed and bent to retrieve it. In that moment, I kicked his knee, and he stumbled. Sarah saw her chance and shoved him from behind. He fell against the wall, and his fake badge clattered to the floor. The real officers turned, guns drawn. Chaos erupted. I crawled toward the phone, my fingers closing around it. But as I stood, Frank broke free and made a dash for the door. He shouted that he had the thumb drive copy, but he was bluffing. I still had the original hidden. The real officers tackled him, but not before he threw a smoke bomb from his pocket. The room filled with thick, grey smoke. I coughed, blind and disoriented. When it cleared, Frank was gone, and the imposter was handcuffed. But the phone in my hand vibrated. A new message. The money's moved. Meet me at the old mill if you want it back. The sender was my late husband's voice from beyond the grave. The message from my dead husband's number froze me. I had to decide fast. Trust a ghost or lose everything. My hands shook, holding the phone. The real officers were securing the scene, one calling for backup. Sarah was crying, claiming she was forced into this. Mark glared at me, his greed naked in his eyes. I couldn't stay here. The mill was my only lead. I pocketed the phone and edged toward the door, feigning weakness. My body ached, every joint protesting, but I pushed through. An officer stopped me, saying I needed medical care. I insisted I was fine, my voice steadier than I felt. Then, the handcuffed imposter laughed, spitting out that Frank had a partner waiting at the mill. That changed everything. It was a trap. But I had no choice. The money was my life's work. I ducked under the officer's arm and bolted outside into the cold night. My car was still here, keys in the ignition where Mark left it. I slid into the driver's seat, my breath fogging the window. As I started the engine, headlights flashed in the rearview mirror, another vehicle approaching fast. I recognized the grille of Frank's truck, and it was heading straight for me. Frank's truck rammed the back of my car, jolting me forward. I slammed the accelerator, tires spinning on the gravel. I had to reach the mill alive. The road was dark, trees looming on either side. My mind raced. Why would Frank attack me now unless he knew about the thumb drive? I gripped the wheel, my knuckles white. The phone vibrated again. Another message. Don't trust the cops. They're paid. I glanced at it, my heart sinking. The officers back at the house might be in on it too. I swerved to avoid a pothole, Frank's headlights blinding me. My car was older, slower, but I knew these back roads. I took a sharp turn onto a dirt path, hoping to lose him. The mill was only a mile away. Suddenly, my car sputtered. The fuel light blinked on. Mark must have siphoned the gas. I coasted to a stop behind a thicket, killing the lights. Frank's truck roared past, missing me. I sat in silence, trembling. Then, my phone lit up with a call from an unknown number. I answered, and a whispered voice said, "Eleanor, it's Sarah. I have the real thumb drive. Meet me at the mill's east entrance." But as she spoke, I heard Frank's voice in the background. She was setting me up. Sarah's betrayal cut deeper than the cold. I had to get to the mill on foot and retrieve the hidden thumb drive from the windowsill first. I climbed out of the car, my legs stiff. The night air bit through my thin clothes. I started jogging, using the tree line for cover. My lungs burned, but fear kept me moving. I thought about my husband, how he'd trusted Frank, and it got him killed. I wouldn't make the same mistake. The mill appeared ahead, its silhouette broken against the moonlit sky. I approached from the rear, avoiding the main paths. As I neared the windowsill where I'd hidden the drive, I saw a figure already there. Mark, prying at the wood with a knife. He must have guessed my hiding spot. I dropped to the ground, crawling closer. My fingers found a loose rock. I threw it against a distant wall, and the noise made Mark turn. In that moment, I lunged, grabbing the thumb drive from the crack. But Mark recovered fast, his hand closing around my wrist. He snarled, "Give it to me, Mum." Then, a shot rang out from the mill's roof. A bullet whizzed past my head, embedding in the wall beside us. Frank was up there, aiming a rifle. The rifle shot echoed, and I ducked, pulling Mark down with me. We landed in a heap, the thumb drive clutched in my hand. I had to get inside the mill where there was cover. Mark was breathing heavily, his grip loosening. He muttered, "He's going to kill us both." I shoved him away and scrambled toward a broken door on the side. The mill was dark, filled with the smell of rot and old machinery. I hid behind a large grinding stone, my heart pounding. Frank's footsteps crunched on the gravel outside. He called my name, taunting me. I needed a way out, or a weapon. My eyes adjusted to the dim light, and I spotted an old fuse box on the wall. If I could cut the power, maybe I could escape in the confusion. I crept toward it, but a hand grabbed my shoulder. Sarah, her face pale. She whispered, "I'm sorry, I didn't know he'd shoot." She handed me a key, saying it was for a safe deposit box with the real will. Then she pushed me toward a back exit. But as I turned, Frank burst in, his rifle raised. He smiled and said, "The game's over, Eleanor." Behind him, the imposter officer stepped into the light, uncuffed and holding a gun. They were working together all along. The imposter officer's gun was aimed at my chest. I stood frozen, the key and thumb drive burning in my palm. I had to survive this and expose them. Frank stepped closer, his rifle steady. He demanded the thumb drive, promising to let me live if I handed it over. I knew he was lying. He'd killed before. Sarah was crying behind me, but I didn't trust her either. My mind raced for a way out. The fuse box was still within reach. If I could cause a distraction, I might run. I feigned weakness, slumping against the wall, and dropped the key. It clattered on the floor, drawing their eyes. In that split second, I slammed my hand into the fuse box, pulling a lever. The mill plunged into darkness. Shouts erupted, and I dropped to the floor, crawling toward where I remembered the exit. My fingers brushed against a metal pipe. I grabbed it as a weapon. Suddenly, a flashlight beam cut through the black, pinning me. Frank's voice growled, "Got you." But then, an engine roared outside, and headlights flooded the room through broken windows. A voice boomed over a megaphone. "This is the state police. Drop your weapons." Relief washed over me, but as I stood, Frank lunged, knocking the thumb drive from my hand. It skidded across the floor, and he scooped it up, grinning. He whispered, "Too late," and crushed it under his boot. The drive shattered, but as the pieces scattered, I saw a tiny red light still blinking inside. A backup transmitter was active. The blinking red light inside the shattered thumb drive meant hope wasn't lost. I had to act before Frank realized it was still transmitting. The state police were shouting outside, their flashlights cutting through the mill's darkness. Frank tightened his grip on my arm, his breath hot on my neck. He dragged me toward a back exit, using me as a shield. My body screamed in protest, every muscle aching from the cold and struggle. I clutched the metal pipe tighter, my only weapon. The imposter officer moved to block the police, his gun raised. I needed to break free and get that key to the safe deposit box. It held the real will. Suddenly, a police dog burst through the door, tackling the imposter. The distraction was my chance. I elbowed Frank in the ribs, and he grunted, loosening his hold. I swung the pipe, hitting his knee. He stumbled, dropping the rifle. But as I lunged for the exit, Sarah screamed, "Mum, watch out!" Frank had pulled a knife from his boot. The blade glinted in the stray light. He lunged at me, but I sidestepped, and the knife embedded in a wooden post. I kicked him away and ran toward the police lights. Just as I reached the door, a hand grabbed my ankle. Mark, crawling from the shadows, his eyes wild. He whispered, "I know where the money is." Then, a shot rang out from behind us. Frank had retrieved his rifle and fired. The bullet hit Mark in the shoulder, and he cried out, collapsing. I froze, staring at my son bleeding on the floor. Frank aimed the rifle at me again, his smile cruel. "Now it's your turn," he said. Mark's blood pooled on the dusty floor, and I felt a pang of maternal instinct. I had to save him, even after everything. The police were advancing, but Frank's rifle kept them at bay. I dropped to my knees, pressing my hand against Mark's wound to staunch the flow. He groaned, his face pale. Frank shouted for me to stand up, but I ignored him, my focus on my son. Sarah rushed over, tearing a strip from her shirt to help. For a moment, we were a family again, united in crisis. But Frank wasn't done. He grabbed Sarah's arm, yanking her away. "She's coming with me," he snarled. I had to stop him from taking her. She might have more information. I had to get us all out alive and into police custody. It was dangerous. Every second risked Mark bleeding out. Frank dragged Sarah toward a broken window, the imposter officer covering them. Then, the police dog lunged again, biting Frank's leg. He yelled, dropping his grip on Sarah. She scrambled free and shoved a small device into my hand, a USB drive. "It's the backup from the thumb drive," she whispered. But as I took it, Frank fired wildly, hitting the ceiling. Plaster rained down, and a beam cracked overhead. It swung loose, heading straight for me. I dove aside, but the beam grazed my leg, sending sharp pain through my body. I lay there, dazed, as Frank and the imposter climbed out the window. The police surged forward, but Frank tossed a grenade inside. It wasn't explosive. It was a smoke grenade, filling the room with thick haze. When it cleared, they were gone, and the USB drive was missing from my hand. Sarah pointed to where it had skidded under machinery, but as I crawled toward it, I saw the imposter officer's body lying still. He'd been shot in the crossfire, and in his pocket, something glinted, the key to the safe deposit box. The key in the dead imposter's pocket was my last link to the truth. I had to retrieve it before the police sealed the scene. My leg throbbed where the beam hit me, but I forced myself to move. The state police were everywhere, securing the area and tending to Mark. An officer helped me up, asking if I was hurt. I nodded, but my eyes were fixed on that key. Sarah was being questioned, her story unraveling. She claimed Frank forced her into this, but I didn't know what to believe. I had to get that key and reach the bank before Frank did. My safety was at risk. If Frank had allies, they might be waiting. As I limped toward the body, a detective approached me, his badge genuine this time. He said they found evidence linking Frank to my husband's old business deals. But then, his radio crackled. A report came in that Frank had been spotted at the bank downtown. My heart sank. He was after the safe deposit box. I had to move fast. The detective offered to drive me to the hospital, but I refused, insisting I was fine. I snatched the key from the imposter's pocket when no one was looking, but as I tucked it into my pocket, Sarah caught my eye. She mouthed, "He has a copy of the key. That changed everything. Frank might already be there. I rushed outside, flagging down a police cruiser. The officer agreed to take me to the bank. As we drove, I noticed the detective following us in his car. Something felt off. His questions were too pointed. When we arrived at the bank, it was closed, lights off. But the back door was ajar. I stepped inside, the officer behind me. The vault room was dark, and I heard footsteps. Then, a voice echoed from the shadows. "I've been waiting, Eleanor." It was Frank, holding a gun, and beside him stood the detective, his smile confirming my fear. He was Frank's partner. Frank and the detective had me cornered in the bank vault. I had to think fast. The key was useless if they already emptied the box. My leg ached, and my breath came in shallow gasps. Frank laughed, waving his gun. "We've got the will, and now we've got you," he said. The detective nodded, his hand on his own weapon. I needed to expose them and survive. Everything I had was on the line. I glanced around the vault. Rows of safe deposit boxes lined the walls. I remembered my husband telling me about a hidden panic button under the manager's desk. It was my only hope. I feigned collapse, stumbling toward the desk. Frank stepped closer, confident. "Give it up, old woman," he sneered. My fingers brushed against the desk's underside, finding the button. I pressed it hard. Silent alarms blared and lights flashed. Frank and the detective startled, turning toward the noise. In that moment, I ducked behind a cabinet. But the alarm didn't bring help. Instead, the vault door began to close automatically, sealing us inside. Frank cursed, rushing to stop it, but it slammed shut with a heavy thud. We were trapped. The detective panicked, yelling that we'd run out of air. Frank aimed his gun at me. "Open it," he demanded. I didn't know how. Then, my phone vibrated, a message from an unknown number. "The backup data is safe. I'm outside." It was Sarah's number. But as I read it, Frank snatched my phone and crushed it under his heel. He grinned. "No more tricks." But then, a faint tapping came from the other side of the vault door. Someone was out there. Frank raised his gun, aiming at the door. The tapping grew louder, and a voice called my name. It was Mark, weak but determined. "Mum, I'm here," he said. Frank's eyes widened in surprise. He fired at the door, the bullet ricocheting inside the confined space. It hit the detective in the chest, and he fell, gasping. Frank stared in shock, his weapon wavering. I saw my chance and lunged for his gun. We struggled, but he was stronger. He pinned me against the wall, his hands around my throat. I couldn't breathe. Then, the vault door hissed open a crack, enough to see Mark outside, holding a crowbar. But behind him, another figure emerged. Frank's wife, whom I thought was dead. She aimed a gun at Mark. "Let him go, Frank," she said. "We have what we need." Frank's wife, Clara, was supposed to have died years ago in a car accident. Seeing her alive stunned me into stillness. Frank released my throat, stepping back with a smug look. Clara kept her gun trained on Mark, who leaned heavily on the crowbar, his shoulder bandaged. "The money is already transferred," Clara said. "We're leaving." My mind raced. I had to stop them and clear my name. The detective lay bleeding on the floor, but he was still alive, moaning softly. I had to keep them here until help arrived. If I failed, Mark could die. I edged toward the vault door, but Clara shook her head. "Don't move, Eleanor." Frank started gathering documents from a safe deposit box, the forged will and other papers. I noticed one had my husband's signature, but it looked off. Suddenly, Mark coughed, drawing attention. He whispered, The real will is in box 214, not this one. Frank and Clara turned, confused. That caught them off guard. I lunged for box 214, my fingers fumbling with the key. Frank fired, but the bullet went wide, hitting a light fixture. Sparks rained down. I unlocked the box and pulled out a thick envelope. Inside was the original will, along with a letter from my husband detailing Frank's embezzlement. Clara saw it, and her confidence cracked. "You lied to me, Frank," she demanded. Frank glared at me, then at Mark. "This changes nothing," he said, but his voice wavered. Then sirens wailed outside. Backup had arrived. Clara lowered her gun, her resolve breaking. But Frank wasn't done. He grabbed Clara and shoved her toward me, making a run for the door. Mark tried to block him, but Frank knocked him aside. I reached for Frank, but he was too fast. He dashed into the bank lobby and I followed, the will clutched in my hand. The police were swarming in, but Frank had a hostage, a bank employee he'd dragged from a back room. He held a knife to her throat. "Let me go, or she dies," he shouted. The police froze, their weapons raised. I stood there, breathing heavily, the will proof of my innocence. But as Frank backed toward the exit, he looked at me and said, "This isn't over." Then, he vanished into the night, taking the hostage with him. The police gave chase, but I knew he had escape routes planned. I turned back to the vault, where Clara was surrendering. Mark was being treated by paramedics. For a moment, I felt relief. But then, my phone, the one Frank crushed, buzzed from the fragments. A text lit up the screen. "The game has just begun. You should have died in that farmhouse." It was from Frank's number, but the tone was different, colder, more calculated. I realized he wasn't working alone. Someone else was pulling the strings. The text on the shattered phone screen felt like a ghost from the grave. I had to identify the real mastermind before they struck again. My body screamed in protest as I stood in the bank lobby, the will clenched in my hand. Police swarmed around me, but their presence offered little comfort. Clara was in custody, and Mark was being loaded into an ambulance. Sarah hovered nearby, her eyes wide with fear. I needed to secure the original will and expose this hidden player. My safety depended on it. Another attack could finish me. An officer tried to take the will as evidence, but I refused, insisting it stayed with me. Then Sarah stepped forward, whispering that she had information about Frank's operations. She said there was a ledger he kept, detailing payments to someone else. This new piece of evidence changed everything. I pressed her for details, but she clammed up when a detective approached. Then I noticed the detective's badge number matched one from an old case my husband worked on. He asked for the will, his tone too eager. I handed over a decoy envelope I'd prepared earlier. As he walked away, Sarah slipped me a small key. "It's for a storage locker," she murmured. "Frank kept secrets there." But then the detective turned back, his smile cold. "Eleanor, we need to talk about your husband's old partner," he said. "The one who supposedly died." Behind him, a figure emerged from the shadows. A man I hadn't seen in decades, my husband's first business associate, James. He was supposed to be dead. James nodded at me, his eyes empty. "Long time no see," he said. The police parted for him like he owned the place. James being alive changed everything. I had to get to that storage locker before he did. My mind raced with old memories. James was ruthless, and his death must have been a cover. The police were now treating him as a witness, but I knew better. I clutched Sarah's key, my palms sweating. I knew what I had to do: find the ledger and prove James was the mastermind. It was risky. Trusting Sarah could backfire. and my injuries made every movement agony. James smiled, playing the grieving friend, but his eyes held a threat. He claimed he came to help clear my husband's name, but I saw through the act. Suddenly, Mark shouted from his gurney, a warning that James had a gun. Chaos erupted as officers drew their weapons. In the confusion, I ducked out a side door into the alley. Sarah followed, her face pale. She said James forced her to cooperate, threatening her kids. That revelation explained her earlier behavior. We hailed a cab, heading toward the storage facility. But as we drove, I noticed a black sedan tailing us. Sarah pointed out it was James's car. I told the driver to take a detour, losing them in narrow streets. We arrived at the facility, the gate looming in the dark. I used the key to enter, the lock clicking open. Inside, Unit 42 was packed with files and boxes. I found the ledger, its pages filled with transactions to an offshore account. But as I flipped through it, a photo fell out. My husband and James, smiling, with a third person I recognized. The judge, who oversaw my will. Then the unit door slammed shut behind us, trapping us. James stood there, holding a gun. "You shouldn't have come here, Eleanor," he said. Outside, the black sedan's headlights lit up the room. James had us trapped in the storage unit. I had to use the ledger as leverage to survive. My heart pounded, the ledger heavy in my hands. Sarah trembled beside me, but I stood my ground. James aimed the gun, demanding the ledger. I refused, threatening to destroy it if he came closer. I needed to escape and expose him, but if I failed, we would die. He laughed, saying he had cops on his payroll so no one would believe me. Suddenly, Sarah lunged at him, knocking the gun aside. It skidded under a shelf. James backhanded her, and she fell against a box. I used the moment to grab a metal rod from a broken shelf. James recovered, pulling a knife. "You're both disposable," he snarled. Then I noticed the ledger had a hidden compartment. Inside was a USB drive labeled Contingency Plan. James saw it, and his confidence wavered. "That's mine," he hissed, stepping forward. But then, footsteps echoed outside. The police had arrived, sirens blaring. James cursed, turning to flee. I swung the rod, hitting his leg, and he stumbled. The police burst in, guns drawn. James raised his hands, smiling. "I'm here to help," he told them. The lead officer nodded, lowering his weapon. He looked at me and said, "Eleanor, you're under arrest for fraud and endangerment." James had set me up. As they cuffed me, I saw the USB drive roll under a cabinet, out of sight. James winked. "Game over," he whispered. Being arrested for crimes I didn't commit was the ultimate betrayal. I had to clear my name and use that USB drive before it was too late. The cuffs bit into my wrists as officers led me to a squad car. Sarah was taken separately, her protests ignored. I had to survive interrogation and find the drive. I risked my freedom and any remaining trust in the system. James watched from the sidewalk, his smirk telling me he'd won for now. At the station, they put me in a holding cell, cold and sterile. I focused on the USB. If I could get word to someone, maybe Mark or a real ally. Then, a young officer slipped me a note during booking. It read, "I knew your husband. Check your shoe." When I was alone, I found a small key taped inside my sneaker, the key to the evidence locker where they'd stored my belongings. That small turn of events gave me a sliver of hope. I waited for shift change when the guard was distracted. Using the key, I picked the cell lock, a skill from my youth on the farm. I crept into the hallway, heading for the evidence room. But as I reached it, I heard voices, James was there with the lead detective, discussing how to lose the ledger. I hid behind a cart, my breath shallow. They left, and I entered the room, finding my bag. The USB drive wasn't there. They must have taken it. Then I spotted it on a desk, next to a computer. I grabbed it and plugged it in quickly. Files opened, showing wire transfers and emails between James and the judge, but as I scanned them, an alarm blared. I'd triggered a silent alert. Guards rushed in, and I was surrounded. James appeared in the doorway, holding the ledger. "You're too late, Eleanor," he said. "The money's gone, and you'll take the fall." Outside the window, I saw Mark being brought in, his face battered. He mouthed, "I'm sorry," before they shoved him into a cell. I realized with a jolt that James had turned my own son against me again. Mark's betrayal cut deeper than any knife. I had to escape this station and use the USB data to bring James down. The guards dragged me back to a cell, but I hid the USB in my mouth, swallowing it for safekeeping. It was risky, but I had no other choice. I had to get that data out and expose the corruption. I risked my health and any chance of reconciliation with my family. James visited my cell, taunting me through the bars. He said Mark confessed to helping him in exchange for a cut of the money. Then, the young officer from earlier slipped a phone through the food slot. "Call this number," he whispered. I dialed, and a woman answered. My husband's old lawyer, Margaret, whom I thought had retired. She said she had copies of the contingency plan and was on her way. That unexpected development revived my hope. I pretended to collapse, drawing the guards' attention. They opened the cell to check on me, and I fought back, using a hidden pen to jab one in the neck. I ran into the hallway, heading for the exit. Alarms blared, and shots rang out. I ducked into a janitor's closet, barricading the door. Through the vent, I heard James ordering a lockdown. Then, my phone buzzed, a message from Margaret. "I'm outside with the press. Come to the front." I had to make a run for it. I burst out of the closet, sprinting toward the lobby. Police chased me, but I didn't stop. As I reached the doors, I saw Margaret standing with reporters, cameras flashing. James emerged from behind them, his face a mask of rage. He raised a gun, aiming at me. "This ends now!" he shouted. But before he could fire, Mark stepped in front of me, taking the bullet. He fell to the ground, and chaos erupted. James was tackled by officers, but as they cuffed him, he laughed. "You think this is over? I have insurance," he yelled. Then my phone rang, an unknown number. I answered, and a distorted voice said, "The assets are moved. You'll never see a dime." The call ended, and I stood there, holding my dying son, knowing the fight was far from finished. Mark lay bleeding in my arms, his breath shallow. I had to stop the bleeding and get him help immediately. The police swarmed around us, cuffing James, but my focus was on my son. His eyes fluttered open, and he whispered, "I'm sorry, Mom." I applied pressure to his wound, my hands trembling. Paramedics rushed over, pushing me aside to load him onto a stretcher. I couldn't lose him, not after everything. His pale face showed how much this fight had taken from us. James shouted from the police car that his insurance would destroy me, but I ignored him. As they took Mark away, I felt a hand on my shoulder. Margaret, the lawyer, holding a folder. She said she had proof the assets were moved to an offshore account, but we could trace them. Now, I had to recover the money and clear our names. But then, my stomach cramped violently. The USB drive I swallowed was causing issues. I doubled over, and Margaret helped me to her car. On the way to the hospital, She revealed that James had a partner in the police department, someone high-ranking. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The clock is ticking. 12 hours until the money disappears forever. I looked at Margaret, and she nodded grimly. "We have to move now," she said. But as we pulled into the hospital parking lot, I saw Sarah standing by the entrance, her face streaked with tears. She held up a burner phone. "He's calling," she said. It's the distorted voice again. I took the phone, and the voice hissed. "You should have died in that farmhouse." Then, the line went dead. Sarah pointed to a black van idling across the street. Its windows were tinted, and it began to slowly roll toward us. The black van approaching meant we were still targets. I had to get inside the hospital and check on Mark while securing the USB data. Margaret parked quickly, and we hurried toward the emergency room. My body ached, and the USB felt like a rock in my gut. I needed medical attention, but finding the mastermind came first. Sarah followed, explaining that the distorted voice had threatened her kids if she didn't cooperate. Now, innocent lives were in danger. Inside, doctors were working on Mark, and we were told to wait. I used the time to speak with a sympathetic nurse who agreed to help me pass the USB safely once it was out. Margaret made calls, tracing the offshore account to a shell company in the Caymans. But then, a detective I recognized from earlier, the one who arrested me, walked in. He smiled, saying he was here to protect us, but his eyes were cold. He was part of the threat, and I didn't trust him. Suddenly, the power in the hospital flickered and went out. Backup generators hummed to life, but in the dim light, I saw the detective pull out a silenced pistol. He aimed it at me. "Give me the drive, Eleanor," he whispered. I backed against a wall, my heart pounding. Then, Mark's heart monitor flatlined from his room, and alarms blared. Nurses rushed in, distracting the detective. I seized the moment to duck into a supply closet. Margaret followed, handing me a small device, a signal jammer. "Use it if he finds us," she said. But as I took it, the closet door creaked open. The detective stood there, his gun raised. "No more running," he said. Outside, the black van's doors slid open, and armed men stepped out. Armed men from the van surrounded the hospital, and the detective had me cornered. I had to expose the corruption and save us all. My mind raced. The USB was my only leverage. I activated the signal jammer, and the lights flickered again. The detective's gun wavered as his comms crackled. In that split second, I shoved a shelf of medical supplies onto him, and he fell with a grunt. Margaret and I ran toward Mark's room, where doctors were reviving him. Sarah joined us, her phone showing a live feed. The distorted voice was broadcasting, demanding the USB or he'd trigger a bomb in the hospital. If we failed, the consequences were too terrible to imagine. I had to get the USB out now. A doctor helped me into a procedure room to retrieve it safely. As I lay on the table, I thought about my husband and how this greed destroyed our family. Then, the doctor handed me the USB, now in a sterile bag. But when I looked at it, I noticed a tiny tracking device attached. James must have planted it. That was a small but shocking discovery. I removed it and crushed it under my shoe. Margaret connected the USB to a laptop, and files loaded, revealing the mastermind, the police chief himself. He was James's partner, and he had access to everything. Then, the chief's voice echoed over the hospital PA system, leaving us in suspense. "Eleanor, surrender the drive, or I'll lock down this building and no one leaves alive." Outside, sirens wailed, but they were his men. We were trapped, and the chief added, "I have your granddaughter here with me. Don't make me hurt her. The chief threatened my granddaughter, and I had to save her and stop him for good. My body was weak from the procedure, but adrenaline kept me going. Margaret and I devised a plan. Use the hospital's security system to broadcast the evidence live. Sarah provided access codes from her phone, risking her own safety. I had to act fast. Every second put my family in danger. We made our way to the security office, avoiding patrols. If we failed, more people would die, and the price would be steep. Inside the office, we found a technician who was loyal to the chief. He drew a gun, but I talked him down, appealing to his conscience. He hesitated, giving us a chance to act. Suddenly, Mark appeared at the door, supported by a nurse. He was weak but determined. "I have something," he said, handing me a key to the chief's private safe, where he kept the original documents. That changed everything. We could prove everything without the USB. We uploaded the files to a public server, and within minutes, news outlets picked it up. The chief's voice over the PA turned frantic. "You've ruined everything," he screamed. Then gunfire erupted in the hallway. His men were turning on each other as the truth spread. We barricaded the office, but the chief himself kicked the door in, holding my granddaughter hostage. He aimed a gun at her head. "It's over, Eleanor," he said. But my granddaughter, brave beyond her years, stomped on his foot and broke free. I lunged at him, and we struggled. The gun went off, and the chief fell, clutching his chest. Police swarmed in, arresting the loyalists. As they cuffed him, the chief laughed weakly. "You won't get the money back," he coughed. "It's already spent." But then, Margaret showed me her tablet. The transfers were reversed due to the exposure. The money was safe. I hugged my granddaughter, relief washing over me. But as I looked around, I saw Mark collapse again, his wound reopened. The doctors rushed him back to surgery, and I knew the fight had taken its toll. The chaos faded into a quiet hum as the hospital stabilized. Mark survived the surgery, and the doctors said he would recover. I sat by his bedside, holding his hand, the weight of the past days settling on me. The money was secured, and the corrupt officials were in custody, including the chief and James. Sarah was granted immunity for her cooperation, and she promised to rebuild her life with her kids. The assets were returned to my control, but the real victory was surviving with my family mostly intact. I spent days in the hospital, recovering from my injuries and the emotional strain. We all bore scars from what we'd been through, but we were alive. I decided to use the inheritance to start a foundation in my husband's name, helping others caught in similar traps. It felt right, a way to honor his memory without the greed that poisoned everything. Weeks later, I stood on the porch of my modest new home, watching my grandchildren play in the yard. The farmhouse was sold, and I moved closer to the city, where I could be near them. The quiet moments felt earned, the peace a stark contrast to the violence we endured. I never forgot the betrayal, but I chose to focus on the future. One evening, Mark visited, his arm in a sling, and we talked for hours, mending our relationship slowly. He apologized again, and I forgave him, knowing that family is worth more than any fortune. As the sun set, I felt a sense of closure. The revenge was over, and justice was served. But the personal resolution was what mattered. I had my family back, and that was enough.